Proponent Liaison. Welcome to the Winning Enough Business, Write Better Proposals webinar. Today it's going to be presented by Michel Theriault. And before we get started, I do want to let you all know that I do have you muted for audio quality. So if anytime during the presentation you do have any questions, please feel free and enter the questions into the chat box, and I will feed them to Michel as we go through the presentation. And then also there will be a Q&A period at the end for about 10 minutes. So as you're going through, if you come up with any questions, you certainly can ask them then as well. And before we start, I also want to just let you know that Awards of Excellence nomination period is still open. So if you have any idea that if you want to nominate anybody for any of the categories, please feel free and submit those nominations. You can find more information on it at the World Workplace website. Thank you very much. Okay, Michel, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move past the FM Consulting Council information. You can see our vision and mission statement on the slide. And there's a number of things for consultants, obviously. Ask the expert, online resources, locate a speaker, find a consultant, etc. So if you're looking for ways of advising your clients, if you're consultants, then you can point them to the FM Consultants Council. And here are a number of our sponsors, Platinum sponsor, Gold, and Bronze. So obviously the moderator is Joel, and I'm going to be presenting. My name is Michel Theriault. I'm with Strategic Advisor, a facility management consulting firm. It's one of the things that I do. And some of the presentation logistics. Now, one of the things here is Q&A. We will have a period of time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. However, as Joel has mentioned, you can type in a question during the session, and if it's something that I can address at the time, I would be certainly happy to. Otherwise, we'll wait till the end. I'm not certain if you're getting a quick survey. Joel, if you can, are they getting a survey at the end of the webinar?
I believe they do get a survey at the end.
Satisfaction type survey?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I believe it's when they exit the webinar, it should pop up.
Okay. And obviously this presentation, the recorded webinar, is going to be available on the FMCC's website, and you see the URL right there. And of course, your participation with questions in particular is greatly appreciated. I'm sure you've heard this before, but there is never a stupid question. So some of the learning objectives in this particular webinar. So I want you to learn why boilerplate material and a fluffy sales pitch won't win you more business. I also want you to discover the key things you need to do to differentiate yourself from your competition. And we'll talk about that in detail. And I want you to understand how to write and format your proposal so it's easy for evaluators to give you top marks. Now, a little bit about myself. I'm a speaker, author, and consultant with about 25 years of experience in FM, and I've been a member of IFMA for just a little over 22 years. I've written the book Managing Facilities and Real Estate, and also on this particular topic, I've written the book Win More Business, Write Better Proposals. In an earlier life, I worked for a facility management outsourcing company, and I wrote a lot of very large proposals, RFP responses for our outsourcing services. And that's where a lot of the learnings from this particular book, Win More Business, Write Better Proposals, come from. And I've encapsulated a number of those items in this particular presentation, and I hope you'll enjoy it. So the question is, do you write proposals? And proposals can be anything. It can be a sole source proposal. You may have a client who wants you to do something, and you simply have to send some information into them for them to decide they want to hire you. Or it could be a formal request for proposals put out by the procurement department of a large organization using very stringent and very specific processes to manage that procurement activity. So whether it's a 3-pager on a sole source, or it's 30, 40, 50 or more pages on a larger proposal, all the things that I'm going to talk about today are going to help you advance and improve the proposal that you actually submit. And so the first thing is, the only reason to write a proposal is to win business. You've got to hit the mark when it comes to writing your proposal in the way it's received and responded to by the buyer. And the buyer might be an individual, i.e. if it's a sole source, and it might be a team if it's a larger bid process. Some of them use very sophisticated methods with evaluation, scoring, point structure, and all of that fun stuff. And others might simply look at what you have to say and on a gut feeling take you up on it if the price is right. Now, one of the things that I did want to point out here is you've got to hit the mark in price, clearly, in the service or the way you've designed your service, the things that you're going to do for them. And you also have to hit the mark in how you are presenting that information to them. And I'm going to give you a series of tips that can help you improve your proposals. Obviously, there's an awful lot more to it, but these are some of the key things that I can almost guarantee will help you get a higher evaluation. It's up to you to get the highest evaluation, but these will certainly help you, and every little bit can help. Certainly one of the things you have to remember is, in order to hit the mark, it's about influencing the buyer or the evaluator, not just communicating with them. And that's actually a key point that you have to think about whenever you're writing a proposal. So something to remember, and here's a key issue about submitting a proposal in print, whether you submit it electronically or you submit it, you print it out, package it up, and mail it in. And that is, it's a one-sided sales discussion, as you can see here. And I'm going to differentiate that from the way you might do some of your other sales business. If you go and visit with somebody, you meet them in their office, or they come and meet you in your office, and you make a pitch to them. That's a sales activity, not a proposal. And you're going to use techniques that you might be very good at in order to make that pitch. But it's two-sided when you're sitting down with them. If they sit back and fold their arms, you realize that they're not getting what you say, so you're probably going to adjust it or provide more details or expand or even ask them what the problem is. If they raise their eyebrows, you're going to respond to that. And you can respond to their questions. If they're not sure about what you said, you can clarify it when you're meeting with them. That is not something you can do when you submit a proposal. Even if you have an opportunity later to do an interview, which many larger processes enable, you have to get it right in your proposal the first time. And if you don't, you'll leave your evaluators and the buyers uncertain about things. They may evaluate you poorly as a result. So you need to consider that. And one of those key things about this is you need to address the questions. If you're responding to an RFP or a tender and they have a series of questions you need to answer, the most important thing is to answer them correctly and fully, because again, you have no opportunity to clarify or to go back later and add information. So the other thing to remember is, unfortunately, yes, in fact, it is a game. It's a game not just with your competition, although that's part of it. Obviously, your competition is going to be doing exactly what you're doing. They're going to be trying to get the edge, get many points as they can in the evaluation, try to figure out the client as best they can, and pitch something that they know will work with that client. But in fact, in a way, it's almost a game with the client as well. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, but they're scoring you. And they're going to assign points based on how many times you put that ball through the goalpost. And that's partly related to the questions that they're going to ask you, the expertise and experience that you put forward in order to accomplish their work, how well you've interpreted what they want, and how you've designed your proposal and obviously the solution that you're going to do for them. So as a game, you need to consider both those pieces, that you're competing against your competition, sounds obvious, but also in a sense, you're competing with your client to score the most goals. And they're trying, in a way, to be the gatekeeper, because they're not going to give you points unless they see that you deserve them. And as we know, those points can sometimes be the most important thing, whether it's formal or informal. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The other thing is a strategy. I've helped many service providers in particular to the FM world write and submit proposals, and the biggest fault most of them have is they don't actually have a strategy for winning. They don't consider what the client needs, what they can offer, what their strengths and weaknesses are. So in other words, they don't even do a SWOT, or a strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat type analysis. Obviously, you do it a little bit differently in this circumstance, but you need to understand those things. And they haven't really thought through their strategy for their proposal, either the written part or even sometimes almost as important for the financial piece, i.e. the pricing. And every time you get a proposal to write, the first thing you and your team or your partners or anybody else you're working with need to do is sit down and think about the strategy. How are you going to win? What do you need to win? And that's one of the reasons, and I'll talk about this a little more, that you can't use boilerplate. You need to figure things out well in advance, and you need to have a customized submission, a customized proposal for your client. And that includes things like price, any staffing, qualifications, what are your benefits to your client, what issues you can address, what differentiates you from others who might be bidding on it. And it's not about simply assembling a whole pile of boilerplate, and that's another very important consideration. So we're going to talk about some of the top tips. Now, obviously, I can't go into all of the nitty-gritty details, but these are the things that I'm about to talk to you about that will give you an edge if you use them. Some of them you may actually already do, but not in a formal sense and not in a way that you necessarily think about why you're doing it and how to maximize the value of what you're doing. So if there's things that you've seen before, that's fine. This hopefully will help give you some insight as to why they work better. So the first thing is step away from the keyboard. I've seen too many people simply start writing. Instead of doing what I mentioned before, which is strategy, and a number of other things that I'm going to talk about, they just start to write. They look at the proposal, they look at the questions, and they start to respond to them. Or even worse, they cut and paste from another proposal into a new proposal for a new client without doing much work. And that's actually always a problem. I've actually seen, because I've been on the evaluation side for both facility management outsourcing and P3 type bids, and I've reviewed those proposals that have come in, and I've actually seen a couple, more than a couple, where an old client name is still in the text. I've also seen where they've put an explanation of how they would do something that was completely and totally unrelated to the work that they had been asked to do for that particular RFP. And another example, and this is actually a personal example in writing for a company delivering facility management outsourcing services, is where the organization design that would deliver a national service to a client hadn't been figured out yet. And yet we were required, because of timelines, to start writing how we were going to deliver the service. That ended up being quite a mess, and we continually had to go back and reevaluate the process and reevaluate or change the titles, for instance, and locations of the people who are going to be put in place. So there are some very key things you need to figure out before you start to write, and I'm going to talk about some of them in the next few slides. So the first question is, will it stick? And this is actually a concept that comes from a book called, in fact, Made to Stick, by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. I highly recommend you take a look at the book. So the concept of will it stick is they have 6 different items, and there are 4 that relate to a proposal. And what I mean by will it stick is, will it stick out in your client's mind when they read it? Will they remember it later when they're either evaluating or having a group discussion about your proposal? That's what we mean by sticking. And that's very important because if you're in particular in a formally rated or scored bid process, you really need to make sure that you get into their minds so that they tick all the boxes and give you the high scores and they don't forget things. So those 4 items that or the 4 concepts that I mentioned are simplicity, concreteness, credibility, and stories. And if you pick up the book Made to Stick by Chip Heath and Dan Heath, you can read about their take on them. So with simplicity, it's very important to have plain language, short sentences, short paragraphs. Don't use too many buzzwords, even if you know your clients understand them. Keep it simple, short, easy to read. It's not that the client can't read complex material. It's just that they're going to have a lot to read, and the more complex it is, the more difficult to understand, the harder it will be for them to absorb. So the other one is concreteness. You want everything to be concrete in a sense. You want to provide facts, information, data, rather than simply saying, you know, we were able to improve performance for another client. Well, that's a general statement and it's somewhat fluffy and not provable. So if you're able to indicate a very specific number, a percentage, dollar figure, etc., then that's what we mean by concrete. The other one is credibility. You need to come across as completely and thoroughly credible. Even one thing that you say that's not credible is going to put doubt in the reviewer's mind. So when I talk about credibility, and I probably will mention this later in another point, it's things like, and I have this actual example, Jack is considered a leader in his field. Well, that's all that was said. There was no evidence, proof as to why he's a leader. So the client looks at that and says, oh, okay, that's nice to say, but why? What's he done? Who has recognized him? How has he gotten that recognition? So try to avoid making those platitudes about yourself and other people who might be working on the project. So the other one is stories. Things stick in people's minds better when you can tell a story. I'll go back to the concreteness where you've managed to improve results for another client. Well, put that in your proposal, short and simple, as a story, rather than just a line item. And if you tell the story and put a little bit of background around it in a way that fits the needs of the current client's requirements, then they're much more likely to remember that when they go to evaluate you. So those are some things to consider with the will it stick concept. Oh, so the other one that I see way too often is your bullhorn too big? I've actually reviewed proposals from large multinational companies wanting to do facility management services. And in one, almost every page had several paragraphs that started with their name. You know, so company XYZ will do this for you. Company XYZ is the leader in the field. Company XYZ uses world-class facility management software. And those are the things you need to avoid. Don't say I or we when you start your sentences. Start with your client. So instead of saying, I will be able to do these things for you, which is, I know, a little bit too generic for something you'd actually write, but I'm just giving you an example. Instead of that, you need to say, you will get these benefits when I do these things. So it's really about flipping it around because they know who you are, and this was my point in the debrief to the other company. We knew who they were. We didn't need to see their name multiple times on every page. So you need to consider that as well. So don't use I, we, or your company name within the document itself. Try as much as possible to put the emphasis on your client and tell them what you're going to do for them. The other thing, and I'll go back to one of the examples I mentioned, and that is world class. So Company says, we use a world-class piece of software. And again, is there credibility there? What is world-class? How do you prove it? How do you demonstrate it? And if you call yourself or your own company a leader in the field or world-class, etc., you're going to have the same problem. That's what I mean by your bullhorn being too big. If your client sees those platitudes too many times and they're hard to believe, what else should they not believe that you've put in your proposal? So now we're going to move on to another concept, and that is, are your eyes on the ball? So what this is that in a proposal response, whether it's based on discussion you had with a client and it's a sole source submission, or in particular if it's based on a formal reply to a series of questions that are in an RFP document, you need to make sure that your eyes are on the things your client wants to hear. And I don't mean telling them what they want to hear just because. I mean understanding what they want to hear and delivering that. So if they ask a question, try to understand why they're asking that question, and therefore what your response should be. It's not always clear. The other thing, keeping your eyes on the ball, is what are the evaluation criteria? How are they going to evaluate you? So whenever you're responding to a question, you want to make sure that you're answering the question effectively so they can give you points. I'll give you an example of an environmental management consultant I was talking to. They lost a fairly large bid by a couple of points. And as it turns out, they missed the second part of a question. So somewhere along the way, they took their eyes off the ball and they did not answer the second part of a fairly important question, and they got 0 points. If they'd answered it, they are likely to have won the work because it was well within their expertise. And that's just an example of taking your eye off the ball. You need to make sure you don't make those kinds of mistakes. So the other one is, on the next topic, it's what's your message? Everybody has a message. And you need to think about what that message is. Remember, I talked about having a strategy earlier on in my discussion. So part of that strategy is, what is your message? And your message should always be related to benefits, not features. So you want to sell the steak, not the sizzle, so to speak. And that message should also be related to their issues, what is being asked of you in the RFP, the questions, how they evaluate, etc. Don't look at this from an inward perspective. It always has to be outward. What message will work for this particular client? And once you figure out your messages, you need to make it consistent. So you repeat that message whenever you have an opportunity in your response. You weave it through that response. So I'll give you an example. If one of your messages is that when you do a particular type of work, you have a quality assurance process that you follow that helps ensure that the output is accurate and valuable. And if they had a question, so that might be one of your message because you have that. They might even have a question asking you about your QA process. Maybe it's question 22. Well, don't just get the quality assurance issue in question 22. Every time you talk about something you do in a process, make reference to it. That is your message. That's what you need to weave into it. That also will help make it stick, so to speak. So the other one is, what is their hot button? Now, what I mean by this is every client has something that really matters to them. It might be many things, but you need to figure out which ones matter the most and try to respond to them. Sometimes you can find this out from the RFP. There might be some material in the RFP that states what their current issue is and what they're trying to solve. Sometimes you have to read between the lines. It might be something they're not willing to come out and say in what is essentially a public document in a proposal tender. And you need to address those very specific things directly in your response. Again, they may not even ask a question that directly relates to it, but you need to figure out how to get this message into your proposal, either within one or more of the questions, or if they provide an opportunity elsewhere. I'll give you an example of a hot button. There was somebody I worked with who was bidding on a cleaning services for an educational institution who had a service provider who had been there for many years. And it became somewhat obvious, based on some of the questions in the preamble, et cetera, that they were highly concerned about the disruption during the transition process. So we were able to figure out or find that that was one of their hot buttons. And we addressed that as often as we could. When we talked about staffing, we talked about how we would minimize the transition road bumps, how we would make it easy for the client, how transparent it would be, the things that we would do during the transition to make it easy. So that's simply another example. The other thing is small versus large company. I myself have encountered this issue where a hot button with the client was, well, we want good service from the people we hire, therefore we want a smaller company, or we believe they wanted a smaller company, not a large multinational consulting organization. And that was a hot button. So one of the things that we did was emphasize the fact they as a client would be a large client to us, not a small client, and therefore important, and all the things that go along with that. So all of these things may or may not work, but here's something I want to remind you at this stage, and that is every point counts. So if they're evaluating you on a number of things, these are ways to get more points, and it might put you ahead of your competition. So the other thing is, very simply, don't make them search for things. Sometimes there's a feeling that putting the key stuff at the end, sort of leading up to it, building up to, and here's the most important thing we have to say at the very end of a page, a sentence, or a paragraph, or a section, is the right way to do it. My recommendation is, number one, don't do that, and number two, take those important things and make them blink, quite literally. So I'll talk about that very briefly. First, if you have a key benefit, don't spend 3 paragraphs building up to that benefit. Right at the top, say what your benefit is. Then describe it and then repeat what that benefit is. I call that a bookend. Very similar to the concept of, if you've heard this, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. Again, this is a way of making sure that the key information you want to convey to them not only sticks out, but sticks with them, to go back to one of the things that we talked about earlier. So the other thing is using some of the many tools that exist in the word processor, Word being a good example, where you can pull some of those key things out. If you have, for instance, have just finished a project and you were able to reduce their cost by a certain percentage, don't bury that in the middle of a paragraph, in the middle of a page. Pull that out, put it in a little information box, text box, on the side in the middle of the page with a very short write-up, slightly larger text, so that it stands out. Obviously, you can even put things in quotes in the middle of the text, something like you've probably seen in magazines and newspapers. So that's why what you do to ensure they don't have to search for the key information. I've talked to many evaluators as a process of writing the book and gotten a lot of input and feedback from them. And this sort of relates to fluff, this business about not making them search. So if they have to go through all kinds of fluff in order to find the information, then there's an entirely good possibility they are going to miss what you say. One of the evaluators that I talked to basically said that if she starts reading fluff, she skips to the end. And if there's some really good, important tidbits in there somewhere, she doesn't care. So those are just a couple of tips for you. So here's the idea. Where's Waldo? Everybody's seen this. Well, you don't want to make them search for Waldo. I won't give you 10 minutes and ask you to find him. Here's where he is. But again, the point here is to not make them search for the really good stuff. Keep your text lean. Use techniques like an information box, like a pull-out quote, other things to highlight them. That doesn't mean that you should be highlighting words in bold, etc. within your text. That's not really making them stick out, and that sometimes makes things harder to read. So you have to be very careful about not using italics, bold, underline, things of that nature within the text itself. So let's move on to differentiating yourself. This is a very important concept. Not only are you trying to win points from the client, but you're trying to show that client how you are different, and obviously how you are better than your competition. So it's not just about you, it's about how you compare to others and what you should emphasize about your situation, your skills, your background that will differentiate what you have to offer from others. Now, it's a lot easier if you know who else is bidding on the work. So never be shy to ask. At worst, they'll say, no, we're not going to tell you. But if you know who else is bidding, then you're in a better position to differentiate yourself. For instance, if you're a sole practitioner in the consulting area, like myself, and you're bidding on a project where you know one of the large consulting organizations, maybe it's a KPMG or somebody like that is bidding on it, then you're going to know what differentiates you from them, and you can play up the advantages you have in that area and put that right into your document. And one of the things, again, going back to the made-to-stick issue, is that they always must be concrete. They need to be real, evidence-based. So you can't just talk fluff. If you're going to talk about a differentiator, you actually have to come out and provide evidence and details that prove that you're in fact different and obviously better. So here's the other one, espionage. I highly recommend this. Now there's a couple of issues here. If it's a formal RFP typically put out by a government body, usually there is an absolute moratorium on communicating with anybody in that company during the open bidding period. So you need to be extremely respectful of that. Some other less formal processes enable you to continue to engage people you might know in the company that you're bidding for work on. But there's there's another two things here. One is, if you know that something's going to come out, or there's a company that needs some work and they're going to put an RFP out, do your research in advance. Talk to them. Go and meet with them. Talk to other people. Get some advance information. If you can do that, that's fantastic, not always easy. After it comes out, there are many things you can do. You can do a Google search. You can look at the evaluators, if you can find out who the evaluators are, or who the boss would be, whoever you would be reporting to in your engagement. Look them up on Google, look them up on LinkedIn, find out who they are, where they've been, what their interests are. And you can actually use some of that information as in your proposal. I've done that in the past and helped others do it. For instance, again, bidding on work for helping another company bid on work. We found out some things about the individual, their membership in a trade association, and the type of facility that they used to manage versus the one they currently manage. And we were actually able to get some tidbits into the proposal that we think would have resonated with him. So those are the kinds of things. So you can also talk to past employees. Do you know employees who used to work at that company? Maybe talk to suppliers or other service providers, say cleaning companies, landscapers, mechanical electrical folks. They may be able to give you some insight into the individuals or the company to help you during the bid process. Try to find things like, why are they going out to bid? Is it because they're not satisfied? Is it with what they've got? Have they bid out this kind of work before? In one case, some work that I just recently won, I discovered that my client went out to sort of the big three consulting firms, not necessarily facility management consulting firms, to get some business process analysis in their facility group. And they didn't even actually get responses, believe it or not. So then they had to put it out to, and they invited a different kind of, more independent consultants. So if I had understood that, I probably would have positioned my proposal a little bit differently. Now, I did win that work, but as I say, every little bit helps. So now we're going to talk very quickly about style. You need to sharpen your writing. I mentioned this before. You want shorter sentences, shorter paragraphs, a shorter proposal, and you want easier to understand words. You're not writing the great American novel. Use active language versus passive. And this goes back to what I said before about starting with the client name, not yours, when you're responding. And in my book, I have a few examples of passive versus actives. You can look that kind of stuff up almost anywhere. And it's very important that you do that because it will stick in people's mind more, and they'll have a larger sense of confidence in what you say if you're actively telling them and not passively telling them. So if you want to look up active versus passive language, and the next time you write, see how much passive language you're using, then that would be a very good idea. The other thing is simplify what you say. So, and here's a couple of examples I'll give you. In view of the fact that, I've seen this term many of the times, you just simply say because. In the event that, just say if. Involves the use of, just say uses. Instead of using a big word like institute, you can say begin or start. So those are just some very simple examples of how to shorten things down. Whenever you write, you should always go back and edit, and you should get somebody else to edit it for you if at all possible. So the other one is feeding the animals, and the animals are the evaluators. So here you've got a bunch of folks here, a couple of them maybe aren't even paying much attention because they are bored stiff of what was written and have a really hard time to evaluate it, absorb it. So you need to think about feeding the evaluators with the information they need to do their job, and it's a hard job. So make sure that you know exactly what they're evaluating on. Make sure that when you're responding, you're using the words and the phrases they need to see. In one case, we even provided a table for each of the evaluation criteria and a quick little blurb of how we believe we met that criteria. Those are the kinds of things you can do. You really do need to check the dots with the evaluation criteria. Again, whether they're formal or informal, you need to think about that. And yeah, so these are the evaluators always have to be thought of, and you should also understand who they are, because you can have different evaluators. You might have somebody from procurement, for instance, or finance, etc., evaluating your work, and if you know who those evaluators are, you're better able to position your text. Very key. Learn as much as you can about the client and that process. The other one is, like I said, pay attention to the scorecard. If you've got an evaluated criteria, you want to know what it is. You want to write to that criteria. You want to make your response clear about the evaluation points. So, for instance, in a response, if you know that you're being evaluated on your background, or you're being evaluated on an approach, quality assurance, you want to make sure that you mention those things as frequently as possible, not just in the question. I've mentioned this before, but it's very important. If you understand the scorecard and you write to it, you're more likely to get scored. Make it easy for the evaluators. So the other one is evidence. I think I've mentioned evidence before. You need to prove what you say. Otherwise, it's just fluff. Don't just say things, like I said before, that that you're world class, or that you're the subject matter expert, leading, industry recognized. All of that doesn't mean anything. You need to give concrete examples. You need to provide data where you can, like the percentage of savings you might have achieved for somebody else, and you need to give proof. And these are the kinds of things that will make a big difference when people are evaluating your proposal, and they'll help differentiate you from others. The other one is we all make mistakes. So if there is anything in your background, your company's background, that somebody on the client side or the potential client side might be able to find, pick up and say, you know what, they started this project over here and it didn't end well. Feel free to make comment and mention about that. We all make mistakes. It's a lot better if you address them and identify how you've corrected it, rather than making them form their own opinions. So that's something that's very important for you to do. Sometimes it's not easy to do, and you may or may not know what your reputation is, but if you've got anything in the industry, then you should always, in market perceptions about you, that you should always try to get them in there somehow. And admit the mistake and explain the change that you're making. The other one is don't put them to sleep. This is back to the evaluators. Don't give them fluff. Make it short to the point. Make your submissions well structured. Use a lot of headings, subheadings if necessary, things of that nature. And again, make sure you consider the evaluators. You're not writing the great American novel, so make it short and sweet. Don't try to impress with your fancy language. You need to make it short and clear. Again, I'll go back to using bullet points. I use tables very often when I can, diagrams, pull-out boxes, all of those techniques to make the information stand out so they don't have to slog through reams and reams of pages and long paragraphs. The other thing, can they find the good bits? Like a good chocolate chip cookie, if all you want is a chocolate, you can pick it out. So you need to make sure that they can easily pick out that information and find it and evaluate you on it. Ghosting. I call this trashing your competition without naming names. Now, I don't really mean trashing them. What I do mean is understanding the differentiation between you and them and subtly making sure you put that information in. For instance, if you know you're competing against a very large corporate type consulting firm, you can talk about your strengths as they compare to that kind of organization. You don't have to say anything negative about your competition, but you can put that question and put those doubts in your client's minds. And that is always much more effective rather than just trying to figure it out on their own. So again, I'm not talking about, and I would not suggest saying anything negative about your competition. An example that I'll use with facilities in helping outsourcing companies pitch their business is you may have one large facility company with a fully integrated workplace management system. You know, all the bells and whistles, it has every single function known to man in one system. And another company uses 3, 4 different ones. Well, either of those companies, depending on their perspective, can pitch their product in a way that puts doubt in the mind of the reviewer about the other one. Independent systems, they don't talk to each other, they don't work well together, you can't transfer information as easily, and therefore you shouldn't go with that. You should take our fully integrated system. On the other side, people with the independent systems can say, yeah, when you have one fully integrated system, you've basically got the Swiss Army knife of systems, and as we know in a Swiss Army knife, each of the individual tools is a poor cousin to the actual tool. So there's always ways of doing it without actually saying something negative about your competition. You're putting doubt in their mind. So we're getting closer to the end, and something that I'm frequently asked is, what is the weakest link in a proposal? Well, my response is there's no single weakest link, except maybe your price. Because when it comes to a proposal and the evaluation of your proposal, the client is going to look at all the various different things you do and assign you a bunch of points. Any one thing that you do can lose you a point or two, or that you do wrong, or that you don't answer properly, or you miss a question like the environmental consulting firm that I mentioned who lost a job because of that one question. So you shouldn't think about the weakest part of your proposal and fixing it. You need to look at every single part of not only your proposal, but how you develop it, i.e. how you use a strategy, how you put together your messaging, the hot buttons, how you write it and edit it and make sure that it's going to work as a cohesive document that doesn't have boilerplate material that your clients will find compelling. And so the answer to what's the weakest link, there really isn't. You need to strengthen every single one of those links. So finally, I'm going to talk about what I call the CARE acronym for submitting a proposal. And one is you need to consider the intent. What is the intent of the client? What do they need to be accomplished? and you need to always speak to that. Like I mentioned before, it's not always crystal clear. You have to answer the damn question. If they ask a question in the RFP, they've asked it for a reason, and they are likely to be evaluating that question based on that reason. So you need to make sure that you answer those questions. The other is you need to reveal information that convinces. I said at the onset that writing a proposal isn't about communicating information, it's about influencing the evaluators. And so that's an important consideration that you have to always make. And finally, emulate the evaluation criteria. If there's a formal evaluation process, or even if it's informal, you need to carefully consider that, and everything you write, everything you do in your proposal should point back to the evaluation criteria and how you meet it in order to make it easy and very simple for the evaluators to tick the box or give you a high score. And the other part is get off the treadmill. This is the final point of this. I work with a lot of clients who get a proposal, they wait too long to start thinking about it, and then they're very late in the game, and they're writing right up to the deadline, and therefore not able to do as effective a job as they should. So it's number one, you need to get on top of it as soon as you get it or you see it's coming. You need to start with the strategic part right away instead of waiting. You need to gather all your information, your hot buttons, your messages, all of those things, the key things you want to do, and then you start writing it. Now you write it, you edit it, you review it, you get somebody else to review it. If you have other people who can take a look at it for you, that is much better. Usually they will be able to identify some things that perhaps you can do differently. So even if you use all the other tips, one of the key things you have to try to wean yourself off is the last-minute proposal writing. So that is it for the variety of tips that I wanted to share with you today about writing better proposals. And I guess we'll open it up for any questions that might exist out there.
Okay, I don't currently have any questions. We'll give them just a moment to type them in the chat box if they have any.
So in the meantime, sometimes I'm asked about getting a professional writer to help out with a bid. And my answer to that usually is the professional writer doesn't know your business. You have to write it yourself, but a professional writer can help you polish it. And they can make sure that your grammar and your spelling and all of those things are perfect. If you don't want to engage a professional, then call upon a colleague or your spouse or your children to look it over for you, because you can look at something 20 times and not see a spelling error. Somebody else can look at it once and spot it immediately.
Okay, excellent, Michelle. I don't see any questions. Oh wait, I think one just came in. Hold on one second. Okay, how useful is an executive summary at the start of a proposal?
Well, I think an executive summary of some type is key. Again, it goes to getting the most important information right up front, clear and visible. Now, the thing is, which I have seen, don't make your executive proposal 3/4 of it is about your company. Again, they should know you and they should read the rest of it. In your executive summary, it should be your key benefits, what you're bringing to the table, and the results that you're going to give your client. And keep it to a page. But that's what you should focus on. And also, very similar to what I say about the main body, don't try to structure it in a normal conversational paragraph style. Make a couple of bold statements, use a heading or two, and use bullet points to say, you know, here's the 5 reasons you should hire us. Bang, 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 bang. That's much more effective than a couple of long paragraphs they have to slog through.
Okay, great, Michelle. This has been the FMCC webinar, Winning Enough Business. Write Better Proposals. It was presented by Michel Theriault. I want to thank you for your time, and